Good day and welcome to Letters and Politics. I'm Mitch Jeserich. Today we're going to be in conversation about cryptocurrency. What is it? What it is? Its evolution, its booms and busts, what it may represent for the future, and the great hacks that could imperil confidence in that future. My guest for this conversation is a leading journalist in this field, Laura Shin. Laura Shin is a crypto journalist, a former senior editor at Forbes, and host of the podcast Unchained. She joins us for a conversation about her book, which is called The Cryptopians: Idealism, Greed, Lies, and the Making of the First Big Cryptocurrency Craze. She joins me over Zoom. Laura Shin, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to this radio program.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
As am I. This is a fascinating topic, one I come into not knowing a whole lot about, so you will be easy with me. But I want to begin because my understanding that part of the motivation for you in writing this book is posterity, that we are living in a historic moment when it comes to cryptocurrency. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, my personal belief is that blockchain technology will be as transformative as the internet has been. It's sort of a new evolution of the internet, and one that is very significant in its own right. And for that reason, I do think that this is a historical moment. And so when I was writing my book, I thought about the people 100 years from now who might read it. And I wanted to write something that was very accurate to what happened and just to tell the story like it is. And for that reason, I did not pull any punches, as we say. If I was able to verify something, good or bad, and I felt that it was important to the story, then it made it into the book.
What is meant by blockchain technology?
So as I said earlier, it's kind of a new evolution of the internet, and kind of the previous versions of it. People would say like Web 1 was a read-only web where people would basically get online and just read. And then Web 2 is kind of the dominant form of the internet that we have today, where a lot of us are writing the internet with our Facebook posts and Twitter, our tweets on Twitter and our Instagram photos and all of that. And then what is often called Web 3, which is sort of synonymous with crypto or blockchain technology, is a version of the web in which we can own objects in the digital world. And so blockchain technology enables people to have unique assets. So for instance, in previous versions of the internet, if I were to send you a photo or a Word document or a PDF or whatever, I would have a copy of what I sent you. But with the advent of Bitcoin, which was the first asset created using blockchain technology, I could send you a Bitcoin and everyone in the world would know that I no longer had that Bitcoin and that you now had it. And that was really a fundamental breakthrough. And it's continuing to have ripple effects and change a lot of things.
And that's what's meant by cryptocurrency?
Exactly.
Yeah. How is that different? So many of us shop online, but without using cryptocurrency. We use a credit card. Conceivably still, I spend that money. If I spend that money on the credit card, I don't have that money anymore after I spend it. What's the difference between doing an online transaction that you would either do with, a debit card or just using your bank account, and if you were using cryptocurrency?
So those that kind of money is money, or like the way that it's been managed is the way it's been managed for decades. The quote unquote rails for that kind of money was actually created like in the 70s. And so right now when we go online and we move our money or we pay with an app or whatever, it's just a digital veneer on an analog system. It's not that the money itself is truly digital. And so what differentiates kind of like money that we tend to use in our bank accounts and with our credit cards versus these cryptocurrencies is that when we're transacting with our bank, each of our banks is holding its own ledger. And then I'm sure you've heard that, transactions need to get reconciled between banks. So with a blockchain, there's just a single ledger. And there typically is an asset that's native to that blockchain. So for the Bitcoin blockchain or the Bitcoin ledger, the asset that's native to that is also named Bitcoin. I know it's confusing. So there's actually two things. There's the network and then there's the asset. Or another way you can think of it if you've heard of Ethereum, Ethereum is the network, but then the asset native to Ethereum is called Ether. So with Bitcoin, there's actually two different things. And the way that you can think of this, and this is how it's different from many different banks holding each their own ledgers. So the way a blockchain works is, let's pretend that you and I and 50 other people live in some village together. Well, every day, this is how we handle our money. Every day at noon, we kind of like stand in the village square and we each call out all the transactions that we've had in the previous 24 hours. So I might tell people that I paid you $5 for bread. You might tell people that you paid your neighbor $20 for babysitting, whatever. And each person in the village will write down all the transactions that are called out on their own version of the ledger. And then the kind of like what in crypto they will call the canonical version of the ledger, or like the golden copy or the golden record of all the transactions, is basically whatever the majority of the ledger say. So majority rules. And that is basically a blockchain. If you were to take out the villagers and instead include all these different computers around the world, and if in the case of Bitcoin, instead of once every 24 hours doing that, you're doing that once every 10 minutes. With Ethereum, that happens every 12 to 13 seconds. There are newer, faster blockchains where that happens every 400 milliseconds. But essentially, because we have computers now and we can use computers to stand in for ourselves and to create these ledgers, we can do this where we have this like redundant ledger. And then we decide that whatever the majority of the ledger say is kind of the version of the truth on that ledger. And so instead of having, many different copies and then you try to reconcile them, it's just one that's created redundantly. And then we decide that the version that's true is the one that the majority hold.
And so going back to the example of the village and keeping a ledger, banks do that too, correct? But what's different here is that instead of banks doing it or these institutions doing it, it's computers, people's own personal computers all over the world that are doing it.
Sort of, yeah. You actually need professionalized equipment now to do it, but yeah, people can buy their own equipment or they can join what are called mining pools, because mining is this process of kind of like, yeah, having computers run the software to do this. But one other thing is that what differentiates it from banks is that banks will only have the transactions for their customers. They won't know the transactions of all the dollars in the financial system, but all the Bitcoin ledgers know all the transactions that have been done in Bitcoin since January 2009, when the first Bitcoin transactions occurred.
Can I exchange a cryptocurrency for money, for cash, for dollars?
Yeah, that's very easy to do, especially in the US. There's a lot of what are called exchanges, such as Coinbase is probably the most well-known one because it's a public company. There are others here in the US and abroad. In fact, there's many.
So cryptocurrency is a currency.
So cryptocurrency is a term that is commonly used probably because the first crypto asset, which is actually a maybe more accurate term to encompass the full range of what we're seeing coming out of these crypto networks, is because cryptocurrency was used because Bitcoin itself was designed to be more like a currency. And so since, most people, their starting places with Bitcoin, they tended to think of that first. And frankly, for a long time, Bitcoin was really the only thing. And even the subtitle of the Bitcoin white paper says a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And so, electronic cash, it's like making payments, it's currency. Bitcoin itself is interesting, actually, because I think the network is designed more like a payment system, but the asset itself is designed more like digital gold. And so that's why I think we haven't actually seen that much uptake of Bitcoin as a currency, because frankly, and these stories are legion, but like for instance, the first payment that was ever made with Bitcoins, somebody bought like 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins, which today, oh gosh, I don't even know what that would be like. If not $400 million, maybe like $4 billion. I don't know. It's like some huge amount of money. So that's why I think a lot of people have been unwilling to spend their Bitcoins in a way that treats it like currency. But there are other crypto assets where they do function more purely like currencies. So it really depends on which one you're talking about. Some of them are more like commodities, like Ether is a good example of that.
The reason I ask that, because I just think about how the Constitution, the American Constitution, gives the power of making coins. Of course, at the Constitutional Convention, they weren't thinking about these kind of things, but they give the power to the federal government to create at least coinage, which I think we interpret as currency, and it took the right away from states. So I was wondering, is there any conflict there? Is there any issue there?
Well, I mean, these are definitely non-governmental currencies. And when you ask about conflict, I mean, the US is not going to like ban Bitcoin or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I think very early on, people kind of worried about that. But starting in 2013, there was kind of the first guidance out of any regulator. And that regulator, just kind of basically said, here's how we're going to treat it. Not like we need to ban this, we need to get rid of it, et cetera. And recently, I think it was in early March, the White House released what's known as this executive order on crypto. And it basically says that the government is going to come up with a coherent strategy for dealing with it. And it kind of, was pretty diplomatic. Like half of the document talked about how they felt the need to look at the opportunities with crypto. And then the other half talked about how they felt the need to look at the risks. So I definitely wouldn't say that in the US, things are going to go that direction. In China, they did, but that's because China created its own digital yuan. So I think they're doing what they did with the internet, where they're going to have their own little walled garden, and they're just going to have it be separate from everybody else's. They're going to try to control it. But yeah, in the rest of the world, I don't see it going that way.
This is Letters and Politics, and we are in conversation with Laura Shin. Laura Shin is a crypto journalist. She's a former senior editor at Forbes. She is the host of the podcast Unchained. And I will add, she's very kindly doing a beginner's guide with me today on this program. But if you want a really deep dive into all of these things, check out her podcast Unchained, which it does very much go deep into these things, as well as her book does, which is called The Cryptopians: Idealism, Greed, Lies, and the Making of the First Big Cryptocurrency Craze. Laura Shin, you've been covering this stuff almost from the beginning. When do we really see it start to take off?
Well, that's the subject of my book. I would say probably the first real moment, and when I say that, I mean like on a truly global level, was in 2017, 2018. And that's kind of like the climax of my book. That first big cryptocurrency craze that's referenced is that. And so my book ends up covering kind of what led up to that. How did that happen? And then taking us through that period. But to my mind, the main catalyst is Ethereum, which I have mentioned earlier in this show. And Ethereum is different from Bitcoin because, so I'll just actually tell the story of how the creator came up with the idea. He actually started as a Bitcoiner and as a Bitcoin journalist, frankly, and but he had coding skills, and he was traveling the world, going to these different Bitcoin communities, and he saw that people were trying to innovate on Bitcoin, but they were doing it in a way where they would say, "Hey, we're going to launch a new blockchain, and we're going to add features onto it." So if Bitcoin was kind of built for payments, as I mentioned earlier, this peer-to-peer electronic cash system, then they were saying, okay, we're going to add this feature, add that feature. And he thought, well, if you do it that way, then anytime there's a new blockchain that comes out with additional features, then all the previous ones will sort of become obsolete. And he thought, why can't it be more like the App Store, where developers can come up with any idea that they might have for a decentralized application and upload it to a blockchain where then it could live the way that, our app store now houses photo apps and cooking apps and financial apps and productivity apps, etc. So his idea for this blockchain,
and this is Vitalik Buterin?
Yeah, Vitalik Buterin. And he was a Russian-born Canadian. And at that time that he had this idea, he was 19, which this is an important fact for the rest of the book. But he felt that the way to handle this would be to design Ethereum around a programming language. So that way, as I mentioned, developers could just decide, hey, I want to make my decentralized application about this or that, and then they could use the language to design it. And then it would sort of open up the field of creativity. And he sent the white paper for his idea out to a small group of friends on the day that Bitcoin crossed $1,000 for the first time. And so it was a time when a lot of people in Bitcoin suddenly realized, hey, I can get rich off of this. And they were getting rich off of it. At that time, there was a phenomenon known as Bitcoin millionaires. I mean, it still exists, but of course, now we have Bitcoin billionaires. And so like people kind of had dollar signs in their eyes. And that's what we see happen early on, is that Vitalik had kind of very idealistic notions about what his blockchain should be and how it should be designed. But as I said, he was 19. He did not really know how to deal with humanity. And he's a very kind of pure and naive person. And so I think he couldn't even conceive of people being self-interested in the way they were. And so people will read in the book, but very early on, there's a number of these characters who kind of influence the development of Ethereum in different ways. And, over time, I mean, obviously Ethereum survived and now is the second biggest crypto asset and is very dominant in certain ways. But, over time, despite all the travails and the drama, it did succeed and it did foment that big crypto craze in 2017, 2018. And what that phenomenon was people were doing what was called initial coin offerings, where they were saying, hey, I have an idea for a new coin. And if you help me crowdfund, you send me Bitcoin and Ether, I will send you the tokens at a really, really low price. And it was, again, that idea like, oh, well, hey, I got in on the ground floor of Bitcoin and I got in on the ground floor of Ether and I became wealthy from that. Or I saw that, these friends of mine did that. And so, oh, if I get in on this new hot new coin at the ground floor, then I can also become a crypto millionaire. And so basically what happened was people all around the globe were participating in these crowd sales and they were just raking in billions of dollars. And it was frankly really crazy because the technology wasn't easy to use at the time. So for people to all over the globe, like I said, I mean, this was happening in, not just the US, but like in Europe, and Korea was like a hotspot. Actually, there was a phenomenon at that time known as the kimchi premium, where crypto assets in Korea would sell for like 30% higher than elsewhere in the world because there was just so much demand. And just with the way the banking system is and whatever, like they could only really access crypto in their country. So, yeah, I mean, it was frankly, yeah, crazy. And at that point I'd been covering crypto for, so I started in 2015. So I guess it was only 2.5 years, but I just saw my own life change. When I started covering crypto in 2015, nobody cared about it. I was like begging my editors to let me cover it practically. And in 2017, it was like, I was being flooded by emails and I'd already started the podcast and the podcast downloads just went crazy. And I mean, it was really, it was very obvious after, frankly, in like early 2018, when that bubble started to crash a little bit, that something historic had happened. And that was really the inspiration for the book.
What's driving this increase of the price of it? Is it that people feel and have the confidence if they pay this much amount for it now, that next week, next month down the line, it'll be worth more money? Is this like the creation of a bubble? Is there something tangible that's behind it?
It's both. So first, to answer your first question, what determines the price is simply supply and demand. And Bitcoin famously has a cap on its supply. So even though we haven't reached that cap yet, it someday will be 21 million coins. There will never be more than that. And we're sort of like asymptotically reaching that limit at the moment. So as I mentioned, there were 50 new Bitcoins being released every 10 minutes, then 25, then 12.5, now 6.25. And it's just going to keep halving at roughly every 4 years until the year roughly 2140, at which point it will asymptotically reach that 21 million cap. And so when you have kind of like a scarce asset, it's like gold where, or like Manhattan real estate, the more people that want a part of it, the more each parcel will cost. And Ether has not had a cap on its monetary supply. However, recently they changed their monetary policy in a way where now the kind of like emission schedule of Ether is often what's called deflationary, meaning there are more Ether being destroyed at certain moments than there are new Ethers being created. And then actually there's going to be a change later this year where most likely at that point, Ether will kind of constantly be somewhat deflationary, where so the way they've designed it is after this change from last summer, now whenever usage on the network reaches a certain critical mass, then that causes more Ether to be burned, because basically the more demand there is to use the network, they're trying to like boost the price. They're trying to have those two things be correlated. And so, that's essentially why, like I said, for many periods ever since that change last summer, now Ether has at times been deflationary. But once this next change happens this summer, then it will become probably more consistently deflationary.
Who's making the money on this? Is it young people that are good and comfortable with the technology? Is it investors who is it people that don't come or start off with a lot of money? Who's making the money on all of this?
It definitely is a lot of young people. I would also say it's a lot of what are known as crypto whales, which are people who own so much of any particular token that they can kind of influence the price. And people will read in my book, whales can be quite influential in crypto. It was something I didn't know when I went to write the book. And I was frankly shocked to realize just how much influence they have. But a lot of them are like talking with the developers and kind of trying to push things to be developed in a way that benefits them. But basically, anyone who kind of gets in early of a coin that succeeds, they can become kind of unfathomably wealthy in a very short period. And even if you are just like an everyday investor, like you're not even involved. Like one time I was at this conference and they had a poll and they asked, what percentage of your net worth is in crypto? And it kind of showed what the answers were. And it was something like, I forget, I'm going to make it up because I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's something like 75% had like 90% of their net worth in crypto or more. And I was like, oh my God, that's so irresponsible, blah, blah, blah. But then when I talk to people, they're like, no. I started with 5%, but it grew to the point where now 90% of my net worth is in crypto. But it was just initially that 5%. And I was like, oh, so, a lot of these people, yeah, they get in and sometimes they kind of like will flip. They'll see like, there's like a bubble or whatever. And, but I'm not recommending anybody does that because I think timing these things is really difficult, but I see it happening now with this NFT craze, where, people, they're like the prices are just going up, and I mean, they go up and down in waves, but when it's going up, like some people take advantage of that.
NFTs. We're hearing this a lot with art. Why? Art pieces, like physical art pieces. What? Tell me about what an NFT is.
So NFT stands for non-fungible token, and you can think of it as a unique token. And it's best to go back to Bitcoin and compare them. So with a Bitcoin is fungible because if you and I are paying each other in Bitcoin, I'm not going to say to you, hey, I prefer that Bitcoin over this one. And, it's the same like if we go to a coffee shop and pay, $5 for a coffee there, and the coffee shop is going to say like, give me that $5 bill instead. So that's what makes Bitcoin fungible, or most of these other crypto assets. But an NFT is non-fungible, meaning that it is unique, that it can't just be traded for something else. However, you can have certain classes within NFT. So you could have like a series of 100 NFT tickets. And so they're fungible within that class. Within the other, just the other 100, they're all fungible with each other, but not beyond that. So NFTs really can be like most anything. They could be like a domain name, or as I mentioned, a ticket. The reason they're associated with art right now is because that's kind of like the most common type of NFT. And they're really used mostly, frankly, as status symbols, I think. A lot of times you'll hear people talk about PFPs, and that stands for profile pic. And essentially, many NFT creators will create a series of, let's say, like 10,000. And they'll have, it could be like, it's just something that might represent an individual. Like one of the earliest ones is known as CryptoPunks. And they're these punks, and they have different features. Some of them have like a mohawk, or they're smoking a cigarette, or they have sunglasses, or whatever it might be. And some of the features are more rare than others. And so the ones that are more rare then go for more money. Whereas if you have a CryptoPunk that has, like a lot of CryptoPunks have that feature, then it is probably going to be one of the cheaper ones. Or you might have heard of Bored Apes, which is another popular one. And again, it's the same thing. It's these apes, and some of them have like pink hair, or they're wearing sunglasses, or they have like nautical gear or whatever. Because it's actually called Bored Ape Yacht Club. So they're part of this yacht club. But the point is that many people will then use their NFT that they've purchased as their profile pic on Twitter or wherever. And Twitter now has integrated with a crypto wallet so that you can kind of prove that you actually own that. And then if you prove that you own it, then your profile picture will show up as a hexagon. So, it's just a way of verifying, like, I actually own this, which is the way that, many of us, if we wanted, we could go to the Louvre and we could take a photo of the Mona Lisa, but only one person can claim that they actually own the Mona Lisa. So yes, I could right click and save somebody's Bored Ape picture, but I could never prove that I own it because I don't own it. I don't have the NFT of it. So the NFT is sort of like a deed, or like a certificate of, authority, or some of authenticity.
That you own it, that you own the rights to it, to
Exactly.
use it, I guess, commercially if you wanted to, or whatever.
Just to clarify, not every NFT, when you buy it, gives you commercial rights. Certain ones will, but commercial rights still is like limited. For instance, the Bored Ape Yacht Club owners do have commercial rights, but they can use their ape image in, any like a mug or that they're selling, or t-shirts or whatever, but they can't actually use the word Bored Ape. So, commercial rights are like kind of limited. Like you don't have copyright or things like that.
I'd like to come back to Ethereum and this cryptocurrency craze that you write about right around 2017. Right at, it seemed like its zenith, at its apex, there's a major hack that occurs. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So actually, it wasn't at the zenith. It was really early on in Ethereum's life. Ethereum launched in the summer 2015. And so by the following spring, there still was like barely anything you could do on it. And it was very difficult to use. I mean, it was, even now, 7 years later, it's still somewhat difficult to use. So 9 months out, it was really, really challenging. And there was only one decentralized application that people were really excited about. And it was known as the DAO, DAO, which stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And it was structured as a decentralized venture fund. And what that means is the DAO would solicit proposals from entrepreneurs, and then DAO token holders could vote on those proposals and say, hey, like with their tokens, they would vote and say, oh, we want to fund this one, or we don't want to fund that one. And for ones that they would fund, they would receive some of the revenues or the profits from those ventures. Well, it actually, and this is just so incredible because as I mentioned, Ethereum was just so challenging to use at that time, but it became the number one highest crowdfunded project in history. It raised $140 million. And I mean, this is just fascinating because it's like they're raising this money in Ether, which not that many people had Ether at that time. So clearly it just generated a lot of excitement from the community. But within a few weeks, it got hacked. And 31% of all the Ether in the DAO got removed by this malicious actor. And this was a problem because actually the DAO itself had garnered about 15% of all ETH in existence. So now this malicious actor had 5% of all ETH. So the interesting thing is the hacker was only able to move the money to a place where the money would be trapped there for about 28 days. So that gave the community a window of time in which to try to do something to either claw those funds back or at least rescue the rest of the money that was frankly still vulnerable to this hack. And so, as I was chronicling kind of how they were dealing with this, it was like, at first there were a few different options, but then one by one, they have to nix different options because they just weren't going to work for various reasons. And so at the end, what they were left with was what the community called the nuclear option. And this is what's known as a hard fork, or in this case, a contentious hard fork. So a hard fork is where you make an upgrade to the blockchain in a way that is not backwards compatible, meaning that if anyone is left running the previous version of the software, then they could just make a new chain with like competing coins. And so Ethereum actually does very regular hard forks, but it's just like, upgrading your Microsoft Word or whatever. It's just like everyone's like, oh, we're just going to make the system better. But when you have a contentious hard fork where people don't agree about what should happen, you run the risk of creating that second competing currency. And that is actually what happened in this case. Now, the reason for this, just to explain it, is that since it was the DAO that was hacked, it would the fact that Ethereum chose to do this hard fork would be like if Apple decided to do something that was existentially risky for itself because its most popular application in the App Store had been hacked. So that's why there was kind of this schism. And some people said, hey, this problem is with the DAO. It's not with Ethereum. Ethereum worked as it was intended to work. And, but then other people were saying, what are we going to do? This malicious actor has 5% of all ETH. And so many people lost money and Ethereum is so new. It's bad if all these people's first experience with Ethereum is that they lose money. So, it was a mystery for many years who did this hack, but I was very excited to announce with the publication of my book that my sources and I figured out who did it or who we believe did it. And so, it's kind of, that's also an interesting story. Basically, this person, since they only had the Ether Classic coin, so Ether Classic was this new currency that was created in the hard fork, because on Ethereum, the DAO and the hack got erased. So they no longer had Ether. But on Ether Classic, they still had 3.64 million coins. And because Ether Classic was a new currency, they couldn't really use it. There wasn't much they could do with it. So they were trying to convert it to Bitcoin. But they were doing so on an exchange that didn't take personally identifying information, because obviously, since everybody knew those were the stolen coins, that would have been bad for them. But because it didn't take the identifying information, it limited you to transactions of $2,500 or less. And so he was just having to do like a lot of transactions. And Source and I kind of looked at these transactions. We realized they're following kind of like a Asian morning to night schedule. But the thing is that I had actually been looking at a group of suspects and they were all based in Europe. So I thought, well, maybe they keep irregular hours. But then I was looking at their social media accounts, and clearly from their social media accounts, no, they kept normal European hours. So I was working with a company called Chainalysis that does blockchain forensics, and I sent the information over to them. And they found that some of the Bitcoins were sent to what's called a wasabi mixer, which is a way of kind of obscuring the trail of your coins. And the wasabi mixer was just mixing this person's coins with, maybe like 100 other people's coins or something. And little did I know, but Chainalysis actually had the ability to demix wasabi transactions. So they saw that on the other end of those, of those mixing, that this person had deposited their Bitcoins at 4 different exchanges. And, you can't just call up an exchange and say, hey, whose account was that? They're not, especially they're not going to tell a journalist. So I was, however, able to get one of the exchanges to tell a source what happened to those deposited Bitcoins. And they were converted to an obscure privacy coin called Grin. And then they were withdrawn to a Grin node. And that Grin node had a human readable address, which was grin.toby.ai. And I also saw on the IP address that this hosted some nodes associated with something on Bitcoin. And the name of that node was 10x. And when you Google 10x, you see that the founder was somebody named Toby Honish. And his alias that he used everywhere was Toby AI. He used it on Twitter, on Reddit, on GitHub, on AngelList, on Medium, etc. I mean, there were like 16 different accounts I saw with this alias. And I did find out later, eventually, that the email address on the account ended in @toby.ai. And then what I did was I went back and I researched what was Toby Honish doing at the time of the DAO hack. And he was extremely into the DAO. He identified some flaws with it. These were actually the flaws that forced Ethereum to hard fork. He contacted the creators about those flaws. They kind of said, okay, we recognize that there are these flaws, but they're not urgent to fix. And so then he started running blog posts with like multiple exclamation points about these issues. And then after the hack, he was tweeting things that were kind of like pro letting the hacker keep their coins and anti hard fork. And he is based in Asia. And then the last piece was also, I had a customer service email that the attacker had sent back when they were preparing their coins to do this hack. And I saw in that email that this was a fluent English speaker. And so even though the cash out times were in Asia, I knew that they were a fluent English speaker. And Toby himself, yes, he's Austrian, but he's a fluent English speaker. And yes, he lives in Singapore. He did send me a denial, which I should mention. He said, your statement and conclusion is factually inaccurate. But then he said that he could give me more details if I wanted. And I asked him for those details, but he didn't respond. I asked multiple times. And then later when the book came out, we published an article about all this in Forbes. And I again sent him, multiple emails asking for a response, and I didn't get anything more.
You did some serious detective work.
Yeah. Honestly, it was really fun.
Is what he did illegal?
Good question. I asked multiple people who kind of work in that field in the US, and I got multiple answers. So I think, it's one of those things where the technology is so new that it's not totally clear, but definitely certain people thought yes. Some people were saying not sure. Some people said maybe not. That's kind of, beyond the scope of my investigation.
But this divide that you referenced earlier is interesting. There is a thought that this is just how the system works. And if you get in and you hack, and you take these cryptocurrency or whatever it is that you end up taking, that there's yours. I mean, this is how the game works. And I guess there's the other side. I know that we should have some security in all of this.
Yeah, that's called the code is law argument, because the DAO was created with this tagline, code is law. And so people were saying, hey, since the code allowed this person to steal the money, maybe that it was a legitimate use of the smart contract, which is the software that, kind of governed this DAO.
It's really interesting how you did research for this book. Oftentimes we talk to people who are going to the National Archives, who are spending hours and hours with physical documents. You did a lot of research online by going back and looking at social media and other things. What more can you tell me about how you conducted this kind of research?
Oh, well, so the vast majority of blockchains so far are what are called public blockchains, meaning that all the transactions are public. So you can actually just pull up any what are called block explorers, and you can look at the transactions on the Ethereum blockchain, on the Ethereum Classic blockchain, on Bitcoin, on even actually like some of the privacy coins. You can still see some of the transactions. And so, in that way, you can kind of piece things together. And that's why some of the prosecutors that have prosecuted crypto crimes, because so crypto has this kind of mainstream perception that it's associated with crimes and criminals and da da da. But you ask any prosecutor, and they're like, "Oh, I would so much rather have to solve a crime using blockchain technology than with a traditional financial system, because for them, it's just like all there. They have all the information they want. And then, as long as they can follow that trail, it's so easy to see where the money goes. And then they can find out from, an exchange in this case or whatever, where there might be a moment where there's like a kind of an identity associated with those transactions. Frankly, I think a lot of them find it easier, and they kind of love blockchain forensics in the same way that I do.
Is there a libertarian or even anti-government slant to the cryptocurrency world?
There for sure is, especially I would say in Bitcoin. I actually talk about this in the preface of my book, how Bitcoin very early on has attracted this strange melange of people, and libertarians were certainly one. They kind of loved this idea of a non-governmental money. But another group was Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. Very early on, there was sort of this one evangelist in Silicon Valley, and he had been a very successful entrepreneur in Latin America before coming to Silicon Valley. And he was Argentine. And that's very significant because Argentines have had their money hyperinflated and lost all the value of their money multiple times. So he actually came on my podcast. This is actually a great episode if people want to look it up. It's with Wences Casares. He came on my show and talked about how his whole family lost their wealth 3 different times. And so when he first learned about Bitcoin, he understood the significance of it right away, this like cap on the monetary supply. And he literally, people often call him patient zero in Silicon Valley for Bitcoin, because he just got so many entrepreneurs into Bitcoin very early, like in 2012, 2013. But anyway, so it was libertarian Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. In 2015, 2016, 2017, you started to see Wall Street types kind of get in. And then, these like developers, like geeky people, kind of cryptographers, they were into Bitcoin. So it's like this very strange hodgepodge of people that kind of grasped onto Bitcoin very early on. And I would say that even now, I find it's still that same kind of interesting group of people that are attracted to Bitcoin in particular.
Is cryptocurrency taxable?
Oh, yeah.
It is.
Of course. It's like any money. It's taxed the way stocks are. You kind of have long-term and short-term gains, and then you have to figure out your cost basis. This is another reason that people say that crypto isn't used as currency very much, because if you have to figure out your cost basis and your gains on literally everything you pay for, then people aren't going to want to be transacting in it very much, which is true.
And finally, I did want to ask you before we let you go. Speaking of Latin America, El Salvador has made significant moves towards using Bitcoin. Do you understand what has happened there?
Yeah, they adopted it as legal tender, and they created a wallet for people to use and actually gave people $30 in Bitcoin. I do know that certain of my sources here in the US, that especially kind of, I think some of those libertarian types, they don't like how the law requires merchants all over El Salvador to accept Bitcoin. Like it forces them to, even if they don't want to. And I think there are certainly questions about how well the wallet that El Salvador's government created actually works, and even about the integrity of it, maybe. So we'll see. But I do know that Alex Gladstein, Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation, who is a very staunch proponent of Bitcoin, even though he, kind of criticizes and is skeptical of President Bukele's human rights behavior and actions, he, I think, thinks it's overall positive that so much of the country has access now to a non-governmental currency and to a decentralized currency, and that they have more choice. And I think perhaps, I don't know, I don't remember if he specifically said this, but I've sort of heard that some people in the Bitcoin community think that this could be sort of like a Trojan horse in El Salvador and help the people there.
I guess my understanding is part of the problem for El Salvador was that their currency was the dollar, and that with inflationary issues around the dollar and other issues around the dollar, and maybe just not as much confidence in the dollar as there once was, that it was being undercut by other currencies, and hence El Salvador made the move for those reasons. Is during a time of inflation, is Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, do they go through inflationary cycles?
So as I mentioned, so Bitcoin is very slowly being inflated right now, but it will eventually be capped at 21 million coins. Yeah. And frankly, it will probably at that point become deflationary because so many people will lose their coins that it will be less than 21 million that are actually accessible. And it's already happened where a lot of people have lost access to their coins. So actually the ultimate cap in circulation will be less than 21 million.
And that's why they capped it?
Oh, yeah, to make it like digital gold, I imagine. Yeah.
So you can only have so much. Yeah.
So Satoshi, in the what's called the Genesis block, the very first block of the Bitcoin blockchain or the ledger, put a headline referencing the financial crisis. And it says something like, January 3rd, 2009, what is it? Something about the chancellor calling for a bailout for banks. And, it's kind of this little political commentary being like, hey, the banks screwed up our financial system. And now here's an answer, where we're kind of like, we, the people, are sort of taking control from the banks. And frankly, probably from government. So, certainly I think a lot of people, and I do know I've had people say to me that they got interested in Bitcoin because they were concerned about what happened in the financial crisis. And so they like this idea of having this currency that is not controlled by the banks or the government. Because they feel like the traditional financial system sort of failed everybody.
Yeah, the decentralization aspect of all of this is very fascinating, and also sort of taking some of that control or moving some of that control away from government and the banks. But then I suspect other people worry, well, is this just a capitalist venture for people to make more money, regardless of the potential consequences for everyone?
I would probably put the venture capitalists in that category.
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
I mean, there's a whole bunch of VCs who have invested in a ton of crypto projects. And I mean, certainly some of them are libertarian, but I definitely wouldn't say all of them are. So, like I said earlier, you have like the libertarian strain of crypto enthusiasts, but you definitely have like the VCs who are just like, this is the next version of the internet, and we're just going to invest in a bunch of things and we're going to make a lot of money.
Yeah. Is there a socialist aspect to all of this?
There is, yeah. Like when you hear about kind of the Web3 people, they feel that these decentralized applications could be a way that we as users end up owning, for instance, like a social network. We could kind of create a new decentralized social network and not have like Facebook or Twitter owning this and then profiting from our data. But it could be something where, we get paid for our contributions to creating that. Because like right now, Facebook and Twitter, they're not really paying for the content on their sites. But frankly, I do have to say there have been a numerous attempts so far at doing a social media network that's decentralized, but none has really taken off yet.
Do you see all this just as a tool, and then people are going to use it how they will according to what they want to do with it?
Yeah, pretty much. Like sometimes I come across people who are like either 100% positive or 100% negative on crypto and blockchain technology, but I think it's just going to be like the internet. There's going to be good and bad. And, right now, because it's so early, my view probably is more optimistic. Whereas I have a feeling that once the technology really becomes developed and entrenched, then we'll start to see what the downsides are, the way that we saw with Web 2. Or with the main internet that we have now. where early on people were kind of like excited, and then after a while they started to see like, oh wait, maybe it's not good to have all these things. Like one thing that I already wonder about is, I'm sure a lot of parents can relate that to this dilemma, like, oh, you want your kids to get good grades, but if you start kind of incentivizing them with treats or with money or whatever, then they no longer actually see the value in like learning the thing because they just want to get the prize. And so when you have all these incentive systems, I mean, we're already seeing this now with a lot of these crypto networks. What they'll try to do is they'll try to incentivize people to use their network, and they'll give them, tokens or like yield, like meaning like interest, if they come and do things on their network. Come and bring your money here and then we'll pay you, like 19.5% interest or whatever it might be. But, people will say sometimes that attracts what they call mercenary users or mercenary capital. And then what they want, people often talk in this space about how what they want is actually missionary users or missionary capital that actually believes in the system and won't just leave the second another system is offering a higher interest rate.
Laura Shin has been our guest. Again, Laura Shin is a crypto journalist. She hosts the popular podcast, which is called Unchained. She is also the author of the book that she has joined us to talk about called The Cryptopians, Idealism, Greed, Lies, and the Making of the First Big Cryptocurrency Craze. Laura Shin, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. This was fun.